Hello, I'm Colleen. Let's talk about some great winter reads. There are no Christmas, Hanukkah, winter holiday, New Year's themed books on this list. This is all just winter vibes. So perfect if you still want to read wintry stuff in January and February, but you are feeling like the holidays are firmly behind you. We're going to start with a very cozy winter read, and that is A Week in Winter by Maeve Binchy. This was the last book Maeve Binchy wrote before she died, and really it is a delight. So we have Chicky, who we follow from when she is a impulsive 20-year-old and decides to leave her small town and go live in America with a man she's met, and lies to her family and says they get married, and then continues to lie to them for the next over a decade, saying that they're married and everything's wonderful, until she gets caught in her lie and has to basically kill off her husband and move home. It's so good and funny, and I know that sounds kind of weird, but it's very funny. And then we follow her opening an inn in her town and the people that come and stay. This is a very cozy read. If you want something that's not very angsty, that's just going to feel like, a lovely read to spend a couple afternoons with, grab A Week in Winter by Maeve Binchy. That one's really my only cozy read, so let's move on from there to some mysteries. I have 2 mysteries by Carol Goodman on this list, The Night Visitors and The Sea of Lost Girls. The Sea of Lost Girls was one of my favorite things I read in 2021. The Night Visitors I read a couple years ago. In The Sea of Lost Girls, we follow Tess, who is a teacher at a boarding school that she used to attend, and her son is a current student. Her son texts her in the middle of the night and asks if she can come pick him up. She picks him up. He's soaking wet and very shaken. She tries not to pry, though, because he is, I think, like 17, brings him home, and the next morning they find out that his girlfriend was murdered around the same time Tess picked him up. So Tess starts to really worry that her son had something to do with it. Tess also has this really secretive and very haunted past that comes throughout the story. This has some great local folklore in it. It's very icy when you're reading this book. Everything's so icy and snowy and dark, and it's upstate New York, and it's so atmospherically winter. Not a cozy mystery, but a very good mystery. Next, we have The Night Visitors by Carol Goodman, and this one has 3 different narrators, Alice, Orient, and Maddie. So we've got Alice, who's fleeing an abusive relationship, Orient, who is the kid that she is bringing with her and pretending is her son, but is not her son. And then we have Maddie, who is a social worker helping them. This again takes place in, I think, upstate New York. It's very snowy. You don't really know if you can trust Alice because you know that she's lying. Maddie has a past that's coming out, making her extremely protective of both Alice and Orrin. This has a great through mystery about Maddie's past and why she feels the need to protect Alice and Orrin so thoroughly. Again, there's some really good icy scenes in here. And I think ice is scary. So I love mysteries that takes place in winter, because I do think slick driveways and icy forests make everything so much more dangerous. This was a really fast read. I think I read this book in only 2 nights. Next, I have a couple of literary fiction feeling type books that have to do with winter. And the first one I'm going to say is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. While this does start in the fall, and I know a lot of people have it on their fall vibes lists, I really like this as a winter read because the second half of the book, it's very wintry. If you're not familiar with this book, it is about a young man named Oliver who has just gotten out of prison, and the police officer who put him there is now retired and asks him if Oliver will tell him what really happened. We're transported 10 years earlier when Oliver is at this extremely prestigious school for performing arts, and we follow his group of friends as they perform Shakespeare basically nonstop, and as some very sinister things happen in their friend group, and how it affects all of them, and how it lands Oliver in jail. A wonderful, beautiful read. If you like Shakespeare and you have for some reason not picked this up yet, definitely read If We Were Villains. My next lit fic pick is Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghy. This was one of my best books of the year that I read. It was also billed as a contemporary fiction, but I definitely feel like it has literary fiction vibes. In this book, we follow Inti, who is a wildlife biologist reintroducing wolves into the Scottish Highlands. She has a twin sister named Aggie, and they are kind of in hiding in Scotland. Something really bad had happened when they were in Alaska, their previous home, and they are running away from it. This has so many great scenes in the woods in winter, in like the wilderness. There's a lot of like seeing wolves running through the woods while it's snowing. Definitely gives you creepy vibes. This book has a lot of trigger warnings though. There's animal abuse, descriptions of both sexual and physical assault, and a very brutal birth scene that you might not want to read if you are currently pregnant. My next pick for winter reads is The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. This is it's like a historical fiction with very few fantasy elements, kind of like a magical realism historical. There are 3 narrators in this book and 2 timelines. One is 1791 in London, and we have 2 narrators in that timeline, Nella and Eliza. Nella is an apothecary, and she sells poisons only to women to take care of men who have wronged them. Eliza is a 12-year-old girl who kind of wants to be her apprentice. And then our last narrator is Caroline, who is in London alone after finding out that her husband had an affair. Caroline is on sort of like a tour of the Thames River and finds this bottle that sort of starts unraveling this mystery of Nella and Eliza. I really like this book. I know this book was a little bit divisive, that some people did not like it at all. But some people really liked it. I'd say I put it like firmly over 4 stars. And it has some good wintry London vibes, as well as some like 1790s London vibes, which I'm not exactly sure what time period that is. It's pre-Regency. I don't remember what that's called. It's like early America, but it's not America. The next book that's a little bit also of a mix of historical fiction and like magical realism is The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. I don't have a copy of it. I did, but I gave it to someone and she never returned it, which happens a lot. It takes place in 1920s in Alaska, and it follows a couple, Jack and Mabel, who are homesteaders. The life there is very brutal, and they are childless, and they are unhappily childless. So they've tried to have a child and haven't been able to. This child just appears to them one day in the snow, and Mabel believes it's like kind of like a fairy child who they have to take care of. We follow how Mabel and Jack react to this new child in their lives, and how Jack's a little bit more practical and begins to think that maybe this child's missing from somewhere else, whereas Mabel thinks she's really like a winter spirit. It was a really beautifully written historical fiction. If you are interested in Alaska or like early 1900s America, like more of like the homestead life at that time period, definitely give this a read. Moving into more straight fantasy than historical fantasy is Heart's Blood by Juliet Marillier. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but it's probably one of the best Beauty and the Beast retellings I've ever read because it does things a little bit differently. To begin, our hero, Anulon, I think is how you say his name. Hold on, gotta check the pronunciation guide. There isn't one! Anulon doesn't kidnap, I think you say her name, Katrine. He employs her. She comes to work at his castle, which is called Whistling Tor, and people are terrified of it because it's very haunted. And but she is trying to escape basically a horrible life. So she goes willingly. Anulon is a man, but he has had a stroke and is paralyzed on half of his body. So half of his face is frozen, which is why he's referred to by people who don't know him as a beast. And it's made him, obviously, and rightly, a very angry person. Katrine comes in as his scribe and is working with him, but instead of having like a house full of dishes and furniture that talks, they have a house full of ghosts. And this does have like a through line of a mystery that's very good. Juliet Marillier writes really good romance that's like always a slow burn. So if you like a slow burn, definitely read this. If you like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, also definitely read this. I have another Beauty and the Beast retelling, and this one is YA, and it is Sun and Moon, Ice and Snow by Jessica Day George. Now, this one is way more of a traditional Scandinavian tale than the sort of like more Central European retellings we're used to of Beauty and the Beast. Lass is a older teenager who can communicate with animals, and a polar bear approaches her and says if she comes to live with him, her family will be wealthy. And so she does. And I liked this retelling because it definitely felt more like folklore than like Disney. So it's a very short YA read. It's also obviously very wintry. And I really liked the polar bear versus the beast. It definitely gave it a different angle than we're used to. Staying in the vein of YA, Shiver by Maggie Steifvater, she's very famous, but I don't know how to say her name, is a great winter read. In that we have our heroine Grace, who has always felt like this connection to wolves. She was attacked by a wolf when she was younger, but she lives in, I want to say like northern Minnesota, and wolves come in her backyard, and she has this like relationship with one of them that's like always looking at her. Our other narrator is Sam, who is a werewolf, but in this mythology, which I loved, their werewolfness is not connected to the moon, but it is instead connected to the temperature. So whenever it drops below a certain degree, Sam becomes a wolf. And it's like a wolf, not a werewolf. It was a really cool twist on the werewolf idea, like doing the temperature instead of the moon. My only grievance with this is that Grace's parents basically don't exist, even though they are in her life, but they'll like leave her alone while they go on vacation, and that she had a boy living in her room for like 2 weeks and her parents didn't notice. And I would say, as a parent myself now, that's not realistic. Don't do that. My last YA is Wildwood Dancing by Juliet Marillier. This is a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling, but it takes place in Romania. It's a very cool story. These princesses have, this portal to another world in which they go to at night to dance with all these fantastical creatures, including some dark ones. And you're not exactly sure who the dark ones are. This also has some Frog Prince vibes in it. Juliet Marillier really weaves a beautiful story. I really liked this book reading it as an adult, but when it came out, my youngest sister, who's quite a bit younger than me, was I think 12, and she loved it. So if you have a 12-year-old in your life who's into fairy tales, definitely give them this book. Next, I have a bunch of books that are on my this winter's TBR, but I haven't read yet, but I figured I would let you know their titles and their winter vibes. The first one is The Winter Garden by Kristin Hannah. I am reading this right now. I'm on page 75. This is following two sisters coming home to be with their family when their father gets ill. Their mother is from Russia, and she lived through World War II in Leningrad, and I haven't gotten to the point of the book yet where they talk about her experience there, but there's lots of great winter imagery in this so far. Empty fields of like dormant apple trees and crunching ice and snow. This is a very good read so far. It's a little sad so far, I will say, though. Next, I had to throw this on because I've owned this book for like 15 years, but haven't read it yet, and you'll see why. But it is the Sagas of the Icelanders. So basically, it's a collection of Icelandic sagas. It's 800 pages long. I should probably read a couple of them this winter and enjoy myself. And the last book on my TBR for most likely February that I haven't read yet, that's wintry, is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. I've seen the movie, so I know what happens, and it's very wintry. The train is stuck in a snowstorm, so I am looking forward to that. There is a murder on the train, and Hercule Poirot needs to solve it. I can't wait to read it. It'll be super fun. So those are my wintry reads. I hope there was something in there that looked interesting to you, or maybe I talked about one that you love already. I hope you are getting cozy. Find a book, wrap up in a blanket, and enjoy a wintry afternoon. I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book.